I'm Andy Brown from GamesRadar, and today I am with game director Rich and design director Sean, and we're going to be talking about Warhammer 3 and the end times. Every single time that I have done these interviews, I have asked about Nagash, and we've just seen that he is actually finally coming to the game. So how do you feel?
Oh, we're really excited. He's been one of the characters that we wanted to do for all the time that we've been working on this series. I mean, he brings godly levels of power, if you like, into the game. And yeah, lots of fun to be had with him.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, from a design point of view, it's really exciting to do Nagash. These completely different from the other undead, which is like a great design space to really capture him and bring him to life as the great necromancer that he is. So it's a cool opportunity.
And I mean, bringing him in through those end times, it was quite a controversial thing for GW, the way that Games Workshop handled that. How are you sort of making it your own? Because I saw a little bit about sort of respecting that sandbox formula.
So the big take home for us is that we're taking inspiration from the end times. So it's called the Lords of the End Times rather than the End Times. We're not trying to tell the definitive narrative that the setting had. We're just taking the great moments and playing homage to the characters and what makes them special in this setting. So Nagash's principle behind this, bringing in law of undeath, trying to kill the world, if you like, and have fun with that. So yeah, that's the angle that we're taking.
Yeah, I think the only thing to add there is, like Rich says, we're inspired by, but ultimately it's the sandbox, it's Total War as you know it. So the motivations, the amazing features, like the key moments that you go, oh man, that's so amazing that character did that. That's where we're drawing our inspiration from to make our own version of how would that look in Total War and what would be a fun experience, with ultimately the player deciding how is the world shaped. Through your actions, does it end the same way? Probably slightly differently, depending on who you're playing as, right? So we're fully what was cool about the end times, what can we draw on, and then it's up to the player to take that Total War experience forwards.
And I mean, from what I've seen, it feels like a little bit of a full circle moment, because it looks a little bit like the way the end times were sort of touched on in the first Warhammer game, where Chaos comes out of sort of the north at the end. Is that something that feels like a full circle moment for both of you? Does that feel like sort of tackling the same theme years down the line?
There's some similarities. Chaos is kind of the big bad. There's no good guys in this world, but Chaos is the ultimate big bad, and we wanted to have that element in Warhammer 1 for sure. Without them, it'd feel very weird. This one is about really supercharging some of these characters that we expect to see in this period of time, and having a lot of fun with them. So there might be some similarities, but it's definitely its own thing, and it's definitely like chance to really experience these characters and what makes them special.
Yeah, I think it's a good observation of how Warhammer 1 Archeon really did feel like this was the end of the world. This was a big moment. I think in Warhammer 3 we're seeing that right now that's not there as well. So as part of like was working on Nagash and the other parts of this experience, we do want to make sure we capture that like sense of there is a big moment that you're working towards, and you will feel like your campaign has a climax now. So we are definitely maybe full circle and going back to why did it work so well there, and how can we capture that fantasy again.
Amazing. And the roundtable mentioned it would be Order, Chaos, Undead. Are the other two factions, are they going to have their own sort of narratives, like sort of story the same way Nagash sort of collects himself and brings about the end of the world? Or is Nagash sort of like the star of the show this time around?
I mean, I would say, so we are trying to act on feedback in the past where we'd done less of the narrative, so making sure that every character has their own clear motivations, and that's why they want to take part. Nagash's motivations are really clear, and they really aligned with what the End Times was about, of wanting to turn the world into an undead realm where he's basically the supreme god. That's what he wants to do. Or other characters will have equally appropriate motivations and try to conclude the campaign in their own way.
Mechanics-wise, he draws on like several different factions. How have you sort of leaned in and still made sure that Nagash is central to it without feeling like sort of drawn too heavily on the other factions?
So he is his fully own culture. So we are going, what is Nagash? What is his motivations, and how does he tackle the world first? Rather than go, well, how does Vampire Counts work, or how do Tomb Kings work? We want to make sure that it feels like there becomes this amalgamation moment of like he is the ultimate force of the undead, but we are starting from who's Nagash, not what's come before. and making sure that our players' expectations of, oh, this is how the vampire counts work, and this is how recruitment works, and what have you. We're questioning those rules of, is that appropriate for Nagash? Like, he's going to have a huge roster. What's the best way to make that work? So, again, we'll acknowledge what's come before, but it's about Nagash.
Yeah, he's very much, all encompassing all of this, and for me it's quite nice going back. It feels like going back to some of the really old army books when it was just the undead, and that's very much where we start this position from. Like, his faction, so we're not looking to just take elements from the other three and splice them together. Like, we're going to start fresh and clean for him and give him the podium to be on that he deserves.
That's what I like to hear. I think you touched on narrative earlier, and I think it's quite interesting looking across the last two Warhammer games in particular, because, I mean, the first game started off with, you had those sort of like the Apocalypse with Archaon, but then even in the DLC, you had, I'm remembering the Beastmen, like sort of mini campaign that was a lot more narratively focused. And then it's felt like 2 and 3 have sort of worked out where you get the narrative and the sandbox balance right. So where are you feeling like you're at now with it? Do you feel like players are valuing the narrative aspect more than maybe they did in the first game, or is it just a constant iteration?
It's definitely been a learning curve, right? Total War is obviously a sandbox game, and so we need to allow for that. But Warhammer obviously has such a rich narrative, characters doing particular things, and interactions and story building. So we've obviously tried a few things over the years, as you've seen. Some have been more favourable than others, and we stayed away from some of the big campaigns that we did, as much as we enjoyed making them for Beastmen and Wood Elves. But we've tried to reintroduce some of this back in the latest DLCs, so that it doesn't take away from the sandbox, but you can play with it in and enriching that experience if you choose to do so. So we're still taking inspiration and learnings from that and seeing what everyone's enjoying. Hopefully they still are. If things crop up, then we'll try and make adjustments to that. But ultimately, we want to allow you to get to what you want to do in this world. And maybe that is going everywhere or going somewhere specific, meeting a certain character, and giving players that choice and opportunity.
I guess, okay, so one thing that every single time I've asked about Nagash, I think something that's come up is like, yeah, but how would you do Nagash like without being this strong? And I think over the course of that trilogy, a lot of the characters and races have become a lot stronger. Is this a way of sort of leaning into that power creep and being like, you want to deliver that fantasy, or have you sort of considered how to balance it for maybe more experienced players who want that challenge?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. I think the core thing that we try to do when we design all aspects of the game is to make sure that there's experiences for different players as well. So that's why sometimes you might see an experience that's slightly on the easier side for our really experienced veterans, because the fantasy of that character was like, maybe they do have an easier time. Where we are with the inspiration from the end times, obviously how Nagash is specifically resurrected in the end times puts him straight at that pedestal of like, he's already at his uber powerfulness. We're not necessarily saying that he's going to come in at that full level there. And part of that is from a game design perspective of like, you want the sense of progression. If you come in at 100, then there's nowhere to go. So we want to make sure there is room for him to grow. And obviously the fantasy is he will be incredibly powerful himself, but how his faction plays and how that is balanced by what his campaign mechanics require him to do, I don't think we're necessarily going to say like, oh, he's definitely going to be really crazy powerful. And it's never our intention to make things overpowered, but we're still figuring out exactly how that lands. One thing I would always say, and most designers would probably share it, is that design never survives contact with the game. So all of our best intentions, once it's in there and we start playing it, we'll figure out which way do we go? Do we go left? Do we go right? Is it too easy? Is it too hard? And ultimately, is it capturing the fantasy? So it's early to say where exactly he'll land in the power streak, but we'll make sure he feels like Nagash.
Yeah, and that's our ultimate goal. We want the characters to resonate and feel like what you and everybody else at home expects them to be like. As Sean says, we've been developing so long now and changing and bringing in new characters. Bringing in a character like this is naturally going to make some other people's start positions much harder. Now he's here, so it's definitely a balancing act and one that we enjoy doing and getting the feedback and continuing to build on.
And sort of going that a little bit deeper, one thing I've noticed over the course of the trilogy is that as the scope and ambition of new factions, new lords, and their mechanics has increased, some of them do just naturally feel a lot more powerful, but they also feel a lot more interesting. So I think a really good balance between them all, I remember, was Chaos Dwarves, where you had the sort of like faction economy, but you didn't it wasn't necessarily always rewarding to work within that. How do you sort of make mechanics that are deeper, that are more interesting, without just giving someone the tools to do everything at once? Because I think that sounds like a really difficult challenge.
Yeah, it is difficult. I think Chaos Dwarves is one of the best examples of we had the opportunity to create that depth and space because we were starting from a blank page in terms of they weren't already in the game. It's a lot easier to build tools around like, oh, how do we make this, you know, work well with other places? When we've done our reworks, we've always tried to make sure that, yes, we add that depth and we don't make the game, too easy in spaces. But ultimately, if you're providing a tool, if the tool is enjoyable and good, you are naturally going to be more powerful. And that's why it's generally more difficult to get that right balance when we're doing something that has a starting point. And with Nagash, because we are making him his own culture, his own thing, he's not a vampire count or a Tomb King, he is Nagash. It does give us that room to have this depth of mechanics without worrying about, well, we've already got this thing that exists, we can't remove that, how do we work around it? We've got a fresh space again to build up, hopefully, something as deep and interesting as Chaos Dwarves.
Yeah, and we've definitely enjoyed working on those. I think of I forget how many DLCs we've made now, quite a few, but the ones that we've certainly enjoyed working on is when we bring a new faction to life, so things like Chaos Dwarves. And I think with Nagash falling into that kind of same space, being his own, there's lots of room for us to play around and try some new and innovative things, and hopefully land on something really, really fun.
Amazing. And I guess if we go to a bigger picture perspective, what are the key lessons, if you had to condense them down, that you've learned through the trilogy that you feel have really culminated in Lord of the End Times?
I mean, we sort of touched on one earlier, which is how do you get the flavour of the lore into it without taking away the sandbox experience? So we've been working on ways in which we can fulfill that fantasy, but not railroad you into certain things and going through certain hoops. I think that's been a big one. We've learned a lot again about the fantasy of people like mixing and matching stuff. So anywhere possible, we like to reach out to Games Workshop and say, how can we make sure that these things are cross-pollinating between the various different races if it's appropriate? That's been a really good one. We recognise, I steal all of them, aren't I now? Around kind of making sure that each major faction's got at least a melee-focused character and a casting-focused character to provide those different elements of gameplay, and then from that, give them a feature which resonates their personality. They've been strong suits, and it's been one heck of a journey.
I think the big thing, especially since we've touched on narrative and these things previously, is we've always been inspired by what the character's features should be and what their play style is. But in the recent years, we've seen that actually the motivations of the character and what their goals are in a campaign is equally something that we need to bring to life here, to have that sense of like, I know why I'm engaging with the game, I know what my goals are, and this feels appropriate for the character, rather than I have a cool mechanic, but the game actually isn't telling me where to go with the mechanics. That's something we've definitely taken on board, and we're taking this into the final DLC as well. I think the other thing that is part of the journey, and we're only really talking Nagash today, but with our other characters, is appreciating the space that they already exist in within their culture. So when we've done other characters in a very well fleshed out culture, there's a lot more room to do something new because there's space there. When we've done let's take like the Changeling, for example, there was only one other Tzeentch experience, so we've gone really very different with Changeling, which was a great experience, but for people who just wanted a new start position within this Tzeentch space, that was like we didn't quite tick that. So we're really considering how many lords are in the cultures, and that is helping us gauge what's the complexity, what's the starting state, where do we go with it. So lots of lessons over the last however many years we've been making this now, and it will all come together in the Lords of the End Times. Yeah,
you remind me. Actually, that was one of the first ones that we changed, was giving characters their unique starting positions. You think right back to Warhammer 1, they were shared. Carl and Gelt.
Completely forgot about that. Yeah.
So this is all great feedback that we've taken on board from all the players, because I know everyone loves it and they've got their favourites. And that was a big one. Even over the massive map that we got, with so many characters now, they're all fighting for that space and that dominance. But it's been fun.
And because you mentioned the Changeling, I've noticed with Warhammer generally, people seem to want very different things from DLC. We touched on players want a different challenge, but some people may have more of a preference for which units come in. Some people are more about the campaign mechanics. How do you, I think you put it best earlier maybe, that nothing really survives contact with the players. Like, how do you consider that when you are in like the sort of drafting and production stage of DLC? How do you cater to so many different sort of players?
We like to go after a theme. Thankfully, with years worth of material, there's some really, really strong characters out there with some really solid backgrounds behind them. So we like to lean into that to start out and build out the thematics of the pack. Nagash is no different, right, in this one. So we're looking at what are the main driving factors of them, what is the supporting cast, what kind of units would make sense. Now, not always is there enough to fulfill that. So then we're looking at the next level of things, or we're looking at more supplementary magazines and law books and the like. And that's the angle that we want to take on. And then how does that sit differently from all the other characters that we've got currently in the game? What can they do that no one else can do? Or is there a rule that maybe that we can challenge and maybe break and let the players have a different experience with? So that's where we like to set things out.
Yeah, from like a really early inception process as well for us in design, we start with, let's read everything we can, let's like consume everything we can about these characters, these cultures, everything. And we work with our player experience team as well to see like what is the community's expectation going in, because you can read all about Nagash and go, well, we've interpreted it this way, but with big characters like Nagash, players have been talking about him for years. So does the fantasy that we've built up from reading about them match with what players are expecting? And almost always it does, because like the identities are so strong. But in a couple of places we go, oh, that's really interesting that people are expecting such an experience, whatever it is. And we will try to go, okay, how can we make sure that we're covering people's expectations there? So there is a process of, let's get excited, let's find our fantasy, make sure that we can confirm that with the players' expectations, and then we have that as our guiding light of, this is the fantasy we want to make. And as we come up with designs, we put features in. Sometimes we go, our greatest barometer of success is, are we achieving that fantasy? And if you're having fun, but you're not achieving the fantasy, then even then there's something that we have to question, which is why, like I say, not all features survive contact with the game, because it could be a great feature, but it's not quite right for what we were trying to create. So we're always going through that iterative process.
Yeah, and the other thing, just to clarify as well, is we're obviously working very closely with Games Workshop on all of this at all times, and characters like Nagash, they've got a long-standing history, the different miniatures, different ways in which he's represented. So we're making sure that we're getting the authentic version that is right for now and the period of time that we're telling in our version of Warhammer, which is essentially the 8th edition. So again, it's taking that inspiration, making sure that we're authentic to that. And sometimes that means that things maybe don't come out quite to everybody's imagination and expectations, but hopefully we can communicate why that is, and make sure that the version that we are doing is right for the period of time that we are making.
And I mean, when I think of Warhammer 3 now, I think the only real sort of issues that players, or at least the big ones that I see mostly, are around sort of maybe much more ingrained things like siege battles, things like that people would like to see improvements on. And I know the team has been quite open about the development, about working towards improvements there. Like, how is that factored into Lords of the End Times? Like, are you working to improve that before you're looking at release, or is that just going to be a bigger picture issue?
I think it's just going to be some things that are just ever going, ever present, that we want to try and take forward, want to try and remedy. Things like sieges, everyone's got their own kind of tastes, and we know that some people prefer some of the way we do things in the past, some people prefer the way it is at the moment, some people want something different in between. So we're taking baby steps on that, but we're not shying away from it. We're just trying to take the appropriate actions when it can be done so. And same with other parts of the game. We want to fix what there is to already play with. So that's something that we're looking to do at the moment, so people can enjoy what they've already purchased. And then, I'm sure Lords of the End Times will bring along some new flavours, some new things, some new toys. And again, that will set us on the course forward past this great moment in time, really.
Yeah, I mean, since you call out the sieges, like we obviously had the beta, we've taken a lot of lessons from that, and that has now gone to our, can we make this objectively an improvement for the game? And that's not obviously a simple task, as Rich said, there's lots of opinions, there's lots of ways that people would like to see us tackle this, and it is a big task. It's kind of a boring answer to some degree of like, when will it come? It's just, when can we give it the attention that it needs with, you know, the people we have and the timelines that we have. And I think there's also something to be said of, to get somewhat sciencey, like we need some control, we need some level of like baseline to work from. So as we're developing Lords of the End Times, we need to make sure, okay, this is the game that we know it is, it's not in flux too much, so we can make the best experience. If you've got too many different levers being moved at the same time, it can make it quite hard to make sure you're nailing the right experience overall. So we'll find the right spot to make sure that the changes are the positive changes that the game needs. When that is up to Zinch, I suppose.
Yeah, we've got lots of things to consider now. Lots of parts to make sure they're all working, and yeah, we want things to be working for everyone so they can enjoy it.